Maryland's story. On almost any map of Maryland you can find traces of the first peoples who lived there. Chesapeake, Wicomico, Catoctin, Allegheny, Assateague, all of these and many more of Maryland's place names come from Native American or Indian words. Indians probably came to North America from Asia about 10,000 years ago. Some Indians reached the forests of what we now call Maryland and hunted deer. These people didn't live in cities and towns. They moved around, always looking for sources of food. Later, Indians lived in small houses called lodges. Hunters caught their prey in traps. They fished the rivers and the Chesapeake Bay with nets, sinkers, and hooks. The Indians also traded food and blankets with neighboring groups to the north and south. By the early 1600s, several tribes were living near the Chesapeake Bay. The Piscataway made their homes in what would become southern Maryland. The Natticoke, Choptank, Assateague, and Pocomoke had territories on the eastern shore. The Susquehanna settled at the head of the bay. Around this time, explorers from the British Isles crossed the Atlantic Ocean and landed on the shores of North America. The seafarers climbed much of the coast, including the Chesapeake Bay area, for Great Britain. In 1632, the King of Britain, Charles I, granted part of the Bay area to a British nobleman, Lord Baltimore. The king named his land Maryland, later spelled Maryland, after his wife, Queen Henrietta Maria. Lord Baltimore was to start a colony, or settlement, of British people in Maryland. In the spring of 1634, 2 British ships sailed into the Chesapeake Bay and up the Potomac River. They carried about 150 people who planned to make Maryland their new home. Maryland's colonists soon found a natural harbor, a place where ships could dock easily along the Potomac River. The newcomers began building houses, a fort, and a church near the harbor. They called their new settlement St. Mary's City. Among the settlers was Leonard Calvert, a brother to Lord Baltimore. Calvert became the colony's first governor. He allowed people to choose their own religion, a freedom they did not have in Great Britain. Because Calvert permitted freedom of religion, people from other colonies and from Britain flocked to Maryland. Many Indians were friendly to British settlers, trading furs and food for tools and cloth. The Indians taught the newcomers how to plant corn, a skill that saved the settlers from starvation. To make sure they would have food during the upcoming winter, the settlers worked hard planting crops. Looking for a way to make money, some settlers planted tobacco. Farmers could sell much of this crop to Britain, where the dried leaves were used as medicine. With the profits from tobacco sales, the colonists began to build plantations, or large farms, to grow even more tobacco. Plantations began to gobble up land, and Indian families were forced to leave their homes in Maryland. The Indians moved first to the colonies of Pennsylvania and New York, and finally to Canada. Many Indians who stayed died from diseases brought by the colonists. By 1750, almost no Indians remained in Maryland. Great Britain wasn't the only European nation to send settlers to North America. France had colonies too. In the mid-1700s, the two countries fought for control of the land around the Great Lakes. This conflict is known as the French and Indian War, so named because many Indians sided with the French. To pay for the war, the British government taxed sugar, tea, newspapers, playing cards, and other goods the colonists imported from Britain. The settlers were angry and bought as little as they could from Britain. The British government dropped some taxes, but continued to tax tea. The colonies wanted freedom from British rules, so they could make their own laws. Soldiers from each of the 13 colonies formed the Continental Army. By the end of 1775, Britain and its 13 North American colonies were locked in a war, the American War of Independence, also called the Revolution. Very little fighting took place in Maryland during the Revolution. However, the colony sent a group of soldiers called the Maryland Line to join the Continental Army. In battles against the British, the Maryland Line was rarely beaten. One of Maryland's nicknames, the Old Line State, comes from the colony's dependable troops. On July 3, 1776, the people of Maryland declared that their colony was independent of Great Britain. The next day, 4 Marylanders were among the colonists who signed the Declaration of Independence. This letter announced that the 13 colonies no longer belonged to Great Britain.